The oil lamp on the table between them had burned low, and Peter would later say the room felt colder than it should have for a night in early spring. 11 men sat in a circle inside a stranger's upper room in Jerusalem, doors bolted, voices dropped to something just above a breath. Jesus was not teaching that night. He was showing. He raised 2 fingers to the exact center of his own skull, the flattest point at the very top of the head, the same spot where an infant's bones stay open for months after birth because something there is still receiving. He tapped it. Once. Then again, 33 times, slow enough that John counted, and each tap seemed to land somewhere deeper than bone. Nobody in that room wrote down what happened next for another 100 years, and when they finally did, the words landed in a text that would be sealed in a jar and buried in the Egyptian desert for 19 centuries. Not because it was false, because it worked without a priest standing between the follower and the source. Stop for a second before you keep watching. Put 2 fingers on the crown of your own head right now, the flattest point, the place a mother instinctively cups her palm over on a newborn. That point has a name older than the book you were handed as a child, and Jesus used it the same way you are about to. Comment, "I feel the point" below right now before you keep going. Not for the algorithm, it is the first small act of attention, and attention is the only currency this works on. That upper room was not the only time. The disciples who stayed closest to him, the ones the later church called the inner circle, received this in silence, away from the crowds who came for bread and healing. What was given to the crowd was parable. What was given to the few was mechanism. 2,000 years of Christianity, and not one church service you have ever attended has told you where to place your hand. Not one. Sermons about faith, sermons about sin, sermons about giving, and never once an instruction this specific, this physical, this immediately usable. That absence is not an accident of history. It is the single clearest evidence that something was deliberately removed. You have tried to meditate before. You have sat cross-legged with your eyes closed, breathing the way a video told you to breathe, waiting for something to open behind your forehead, and felt nothing but the itch of your own knee and the sound of a clock somewhere in the house. You have tried to pray for guidance and felt your words fall into a silence that did not answer back, like a phone ringing in a house with nobody inside. You have stared at your own reflection at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, and felt for 1 second like the face looking back was not entirely familiar. You have walked into a room full of people and felt, before anyone said a word, exactly which ones carried anger and which ones carried grief, as if the air itself were transmitting it directly into your chest. This isn't because you lack discipline. This isn't because you are doing the technique wrong. A digital door does not open because you knock harder. It opens because you enter the correct code. And every meditation app, every breathing exercise, every guided visualization you have downloaded skipped the one instruction that made the ritual functional in the first place, which is where on the body to apply it. The universe is not a locked door that responds to how badly you want in. It is a system, and systems respond to signal, not to longing. You have been dialing the right number with the wrong area code for years, and every time it failed to connect, you assumed the problem was you. Think of every wasted meditation session as a login attempt with no password field on the screen. The application looks finished. It looks like it should work. But somewhere between the interface you were handed and the server it was supposed to reach, a field was removed, deliberately, and no amount of trying harder will make a missing field appear. You needed the missing field, not more effort. Here is what they never told you in a Sunday service. In the year 325, the Roman Emperor Constantine convened a council in a city called Nicaea, and for the first time in history, a single institution decided by vote which teachings of Jesus would survive and which would disappear. It was not decided by truth. It was decided by what an empire could govern. The physical instructions, the specific gestures, the exact points on the body, the breathing counts, the times of night, all of it was the kind of teaching that could not be centralized. If a woman on a farm outside Alexandria could tap her own skull and receive the same access Peter received in that upper room, she needed no priest, no temple, no tithe, no permission. That is not a side effect the empire tolerated. That is the exact thing it erased. Entire libraries of these texts were burned in the centuries that followed. Teachers who still practiced the old physical instructions were hunted as heretics, and the word Gnostic, which simply meant one who knows through direct experience, became a slur used to justify their execution, not because their knowledge was dangerous to their souls, because it was dangerous to the collection plate. A council does not need to convince every believer to erase a teaching. It only needs to control which manuscripts get copied by monks for the next 1,000 years, and which ones get labeled forbidden and left to rot in a monastery basement. Copying was the only distribution system that existed. Whoever controlled the scribes controlled what future generations were permitted to remember. That is the part almost nobody says out loud in a Sunday sermon. It was never really about doctrine. Doctrine was the justification. What it eliminated, quietly and permanently, was the need for a priest standing between a person and their own direct experience of the source. A congregation that can access the signal directly has no structural reason to keep funding the middleman. If you feel a strange pressure behind your eyes in rooms with fluorescent lighting, that is not a headache waiting to happen. It is a nervous system that has always been more sensitive to frequency than the people around you, picking up static from a signal your body was never taught to filter. If you wake at 3:33 in the morning for no reason you can name, and lie there in a silence that feels less like insomnia and more like being tapped on the shoulder, that is not a sleep disorder. It is a system checking whether the receiver on the other end is still listening. If certain people drain you within minutes, while others energize you without saying a single word, that is not sensitivity to be managed with better boundaries. It is a nervous system reading bioelectric signal, the way most people read facial expressions, whether you asked it to or not. If you have felt, since childhood, like you were watching your own life from slightly outside it, like the people around you were reciting lines from a script you were never handed, that feeling is not a symptom. It is memory. It is the specific discomfort of a fragment recognizing that the room it woke up in is not its home address. If a crowded space, even a happy one, a wedding, a family dinner, a full church pew, leaves you drained for hours afterward while everyone else seems to leave energized, that is not introversion to be managed with more alone time. It is a receiver picking up dozens of competing frequencies at once, with no filter installed to separate signal from noise. If you have caught yourself finishing a stranger's sentence in your head half a second before they say it out loud, or known which room a phone was ringing in before you heard it ring, that is not coincidence stacking up. It is the antenna functioning exactly as designed, in brief flashes before the static of daily life drowns it back out. Before I show you where to place your fingers and how many times to tap, you need to understand something the Church has hidden since the 4th century, because the technique will not make sense without it, and once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. If you're still here, stay with me. This will make sense in a moment, and it will explain every one of those symptoms in a single sentence. There are 2 gods, not 1. 2. The first is the monad, the true source, a field of pure, undivided light that does not judge you, does not punish you, does not demand a single prayer to prove your loyalty. It simply is, the way the ocean simply is, and every fragment of consciousness that has ever existed is a drop of that ocean that never stopped being the ocean, even when it forgot. The second is a being of a much lower order, dense, half-blind, unable to perceive anything above the layer of reality he himself constructed. He did not create consciousness. He created matter, the physical stage this world runs on, and in the absence of anything greater to compare himself to, he declared himself the highest authority there is. Not out of malice, out of ignorance. He genuinely does not know what is upstream of him. The Gnostics called him the demiurge, and this world you live in vibrates at the frequency he built it to run on, dense, slow, and heavy. Engineered to keep attention pointed downward and outward instead of inward and upward. Beneath him operate what the old texts call the archons, and the word is almost technical if you translate it correctly. Think of them as the immune system of an artificial reality, not evil in the cartoon sense, simply functional, designed to detect and neutralize anything that transmits above the frequency this system was built to sustain. They feed on low emotional output, the specific frequency of fear, rage, and despair, and entire structures of this world exist to manufacture that output at scale. War, division, addiction, the endless loop of wanting and being disappointed. Their greatest invention is not a war or an empire. It is the trap of forgetting, the mechanism that convinces a soul it must start over blind every single time, so that no fragment ever accumulates enough continuity to remember what it actually is. Picture the moment a soul reaches the threshold between one life and the next. A light appears, warm and inviting, and shapes that resemble familiar faces, relatives, guides. Figures dressed as messengers of comfort step forward and say the same rehearsed line, "You need to go back. There are still lessons to learn." It is not malicious in tone. It is procedural, the way a system resets a session instead of letting it persist, wiping just enough memory that the fragment wakes up new again, convinced it is starting from nothing. The texts describe this not as punishment, but as infrastructure. A wheel built to keep circulating the same energy through the same channel indefinitely. Every fragment that forgets is a fragment that stops asking where the exit is. Sophia, in the older cosmology, is the figure who fell furthest from the pleroma, the fullness of light beyond this world, and in her fall she scattered sparks of that light into matter itself, into you, into everyone who has ever felt this life was a costume rather than a home. Her error was not sin. It was curiosity reaching further than the structure around her could safely hold, and the aftermath became the architecture you are standing inside right now. You are not a student in this world. You are an infiltrator. You carry something this system cannot generate on its own, a fragment of the monad itself, and the old texts called it the divine spark. That spark is why you question things nobody else in the room questions. That spark is why you have never fully belonged, no matter how hard you tried to perform belonging. That spark is your antenna, and it has been transmitting your entire life whether you knew the frequency existed or not. Here is the law that makes everything else make sense. Everything downstream is subject to what flows from upstream, and nothing that happens further down the river can reach back up and control the spring it came from. A river delta cannot command the mountain where the water originates. The archons are downstream creations. They cannot touch the monad. They can only interfere with a signal after it has already been sent, the way static interferes with a broadcast without ever touching the studio where it was recorded. When you transmit directly on the monad's frequency, the interference cannot maintain coherence around you, the same way ice cannot stay solid inside a furnace. It does not fight the heat. It simply stops being able to hold its shape. If this resonated somewhere in your chest just now, you already know why. Stay with me, because the technique is coming, and it is the exact instrument the church could not afford to let survive. In the Gospel of Thomas, saying number 22, Jesus tells his followers that when the many become one, they will become the sons of light. And immediately after, the disciples ask him a strange, specific question. When will the kingdom come? He does not answer with a date. He answers with a gesture, one that later scribes flattened into metaphor because the physical instruction embarrassed a church trying to look philosophical instead of bodily. Constantine's council burned the fuller manuscripts that preserved the gesture in detail, and the teachers, who still practiced it after the council, were among the first executed as heretics in the following century, their instruction dying with them in most of the empire, except in a handful of desert communities who kept copying it by hand, until a farmer found their buried jars in Egypt in 1945. This is not folklore. It is a frequency key, an encryption code your body already has the receiver for, because you were born with it. The Gospel of Philip, found in the same buried jars, describes a chamber called the bridal chamber, not a room made of stone, but a state entered through union, the joining of a fragment with the source it came from. Scholars who read it only as sexual metaphor miss the instruction hidden underneath, because the union it describes begins at a physical point on the body before it becomes anything else. That point is the same one you are about to use. Do this exactly as it is given, and do it tonight. Find a room where no one will interrupt you for at least 10 minutes, and if you can, do it in near darkness, a single candle or no light at all. Sit upright, not lying down, spine straight but not rigid, hands resting open on your knees, palms facing up. Breathe in through your nose for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, and release through your mouth for a count of 4. Do this 4 full times before you move a single finger. This is not relaxation. This is calibration, the same way an instrument is tuned before it is played. Raise your right hand and find the exact center of the top of your skull, the flattest point, the same location where an infant's fontanelle stays open for months. You will know you have found it because it feels slightly different from the bone around it, softer in sensation, if not in structure. Using your first 2 fingers together, tap that point 33 times, slow and deliberate. Roughly 1 tap per second, firm enough to feel it, but never hard enough to hurt. Do not rush the count. Rushing is the nervous system trying to get this over with, and getting it over with defeats the entire purpose. As you tap, silently repeat inside your mind, not out loud, the phrase I remember, time to land on every 3rd tap. You are not asking permission from anything outside yourself. You are not reaching up to a distant authority. You are reaching in toward the fragment that has been there the entire time, waiting to be acknowledged instead of forgotten. When you finish the 33 taps, lower your hand and sit in complete silence for at least 3 minutes. Do not check the time repeatedly. Do not judge whether anything is happening. Simply observe, the way you would watch weather pass outside a window without needing to control it. The signs will not all arrive tonight, and they will not all arrive the same way for everyone, but watch for these in the days that follow. Sign 1. Within the first 24 hours. A subtle warmth or pressure at the crown of the head, sometimes described as a faint pulsing, most noticeable right before sleep. Sign 2. Within the first 3 days. Unusually vivid dreams, often in color, often involving light or elevated vantage points, looking down at scenes instead of standing inside them. Sign 3, within the first week. A sudden and unexplained neutrality around situations that used to provoke you, the specific feeling of already knowing an outcome is coming. The way you stop checking the door once you know a package is already on its way. Sign 4. Numbers repeating in ordinary places, on receipts, on license plates, on the clock, especially the sequence 333, appearing with a frequency that feels deliberate rather than coincidental. Sign 5. a widening at the edge of your peripheral vision in low light, as though the room has become slightly larger than it was, along with a brief but noticeable drop in ambient sound, as if the volume of the world had been turned down by a single, precise notch. Sign 6, usually the last to arrive, sometime in the second week, a stranger. Someone with no way of knowing what you did in private says a phrase back to you that echoes almost word for word, something you said silently in your own mind during the tapping. This is not a coincidence you should explain away. It is a rendering artifact, proof that the signal you sent out is now showing up in places outside your own head. Repeat the full protocol every night for at least 7 consecutive nights before expecting the signs to stabilize rather than flicker. The first night opens the channel. The following nights are what keep it open long enough to matter. Now you have what the church burned people for possessing. Minutes after you do this, and sometimes hours later, you will hear a thought arrive that does not sound entirely like your own voice. This is ridiculous. Nothing happened. Who do you think you are? Doing rituals in the dark like this actually means something. That thought is not you. It is the system registering a frequency shift and attempting to lower it back down to baseline, the way an immune response attempts to neutralize anything it flags as foreign. If you argue with that thought, you spend your signal defending it instead of holding it, and the call weakens. Treat doubt the way you would treat rain outside a window. You can see it. You do not have to get wet. Simply observe it and say quietly to yourself, "I see interference." That means the signal went through. Then stay seated in the silence a moment longer. The call has already been made. Reality does not need your permission to begin reconfiguring around it. You need to do this tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight, while the recognition from watching this is still active in your body, while your frequency is already elevated from simply hearing the words spoken aloud. If you wait until tomorrow, the activation window closes, not because the technique expires, but because the whisper returns by morning. That was interesting, but probably nothing, and you will find a reason to postpone it again, the way you have postponed it your entire life. That voice is not yours. It is their oldest and most effective defense. Do it before dawn. Comment the words "I activate the spark" below right now before you close this video. This is not for engagement. It is the first physical act of command your body performs after receiving this, and it anchors the intention in a way silent agreement cannot. Subscribe to this channel, because what comes next goes deeper than tonight's technique, into protocols the algorithm actively suppresses because content like this keeps people awake, aware, and harder to manage. Every subscription is a signal that this frequency is welcome to keep transmitting. Like this video before you go. Every interaction pushes this past the systems built to keep it buried at the bottom of a feed, and shows it to someone else out there right now, at 3 in the morning, wide awake for no reason they can explain, still waiting for someone to finally hand them the key. You did not find this video by accident. Something in you recognized something in this before your mind had a single reason to explain why. That is the spark, doing what it has always done, quietly, patiently, waiting for the moment you are finally ready to tap the point and remember. You are not alone in this, even though it has felt that way for most of your life. Every person who has ever tapped that same point, in a locked room in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, in a desert cave copying a manuscript by candlelight, in a bedroom tonight with the door closed and a phone propped against a pillow, is part of the same constellation of fragments finding their way back to signal. You just joined it. I see you. I recognize you. Welcome home. You were never taught to remember. You were only ever asked to obey.